Dr. Yuval Cohen, year-to-date, shares of Corbus are up over 300% from about $1.60 to $7.20, and it's all due to Resunab. But before we talk about the stock, can you give me a primer on Resunab?
Sure. Resunab is a first-of-its-kind drug. It's a daily drug that targets the immune system, and what we're targeting with it is a series of rare, very high unmet need diseases, typically affecting tens of thousands of patients. These diseases have a terrible effect on the quality of life of patients, and sadly, they tend to be life-threatening.
And you received fast-track status from the FDA for Resunab in the treatment of systemic sclerosis. We're awaiting the results from a phase 2 trial. Can you talk about systemic sclerosis and when we can get those results?
Absolutely. So the FDA granted us both fast-track and orphan designation. We're delighted with that. Systemic sclerosis is an autoimmune disease. It's the most lethal of the autoimmune diseases, affecting about 90,000 people in the United States and Europe. It's a disease that affects primarily women, and sadly, it's a disease where the mortality rates can be as high as 80%.
And how big is that market? Because you have a fast-track status also for Resunab to treat cystic fibrosis, which I'm pretty sure is a much bigger market. So talk about those two markets.
Sure. So, and again, cystic fibrosis versus systemic sclerosis. About 90,000 people in systemic sclerosis, about 75,000 people in cystic fibrosis. Both of those are markets which are underserved. In the case of systemic sclerosis, there's absolutely no drugs whatsoever approved specifically for the disease. In a related indication called IPF, the drug that got recently approved, pirfenidone, has a list price of about $94,000 a year. So you can sort of see some of the pharmacoeconomics that are involved in these diseases. Cystic fibrosis, multiple drugs are approved, but not for inflammation. And of course, looking at the type of companies such as Vertex, you can see the potentially attractive pharmacoeconomics.
And if you get a positive result, a good result in your phase 2, which is coming up, and I guess in November, when do you expect to get the data, and when do you expect this to hit the market if all goes well? What's your timeline?
So we've got a triple whammy coming up. We've got data for systemic sclerosis in November from our phase 2. In cystic fibrosis, late January, early February is our guidance. And then in a third orphan indication with 50,000 patients coming up later in the first half of next year. That's dermatomyositis. At that point, I think what we will assess the data, and it's really the data that's going to drive the next step. The next step may be a phase 2b. It could also be, if the data is strong enough, going directly towards pivotal studies. That means that we could be on the market sometime between 2019 to 2021, depending on the next step.
And then finally, do you have enough cash to get you to market? You have, I think it's $22 million in the bank. Talk about your burn rate and whether or not you need to raise more money, which Correct. You can now because the stock's higher.
Fair enough. We're sufficiently capitalized to hit all three of those data readouts. We have cash well into the end of next year.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on and talking about it.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
And thank you for watching The Street.